Bangkok, 1971. The set of The Big Boss was already tense long before the cameras started rolling that morning. The heat was relentless, pressing down on the outdoor location like a physical weight, sweat soaking through clothes within minutes. Golden Harvest had invested heavily in this production, and everyone knew it. This wasn't just another kung fu film. It was Bruce Lee's first true leading role. His return to Asia after years of frustration in Hollywood, and the studio's gamble that he could carry an entire film on his presence alone. Every movement mattered. Every frame mattered. Bruce had been rehearsing a fight sequence scheduled for later that day, moving alone through the choreography, while the crew adjusted lights and camera angles. There were no wires, no exaggerated pauses, no theatrical flourishes. His strikes cut the air with unsettling speed, stopping just short of contact, controlled to the millimeter. Several crew members watched quietly. Some were impressed. Others were uneasy. The movements looked too sharp, too aggressive, too close to something that felt less like cinema and more like an actual confrontation. The director, responsible not just for the film's success, but for keeping the production safe and insurable, watched from behind the monitor. He had directed action before. He understood choreography, angles, and illusion. But what Bruce was doing didn't rely on illusion. The camera struggled to capture the motion cleanly. On playback, punches blurred. Kicks seemed to appear out of nowhere. The director finally raised his hand and called for a pause, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. Walking onto the set, he spoke carefully, choosing his words. He told Bruce the movements were impressive, undeniably powerful, but there was a concern. To an audience, this might not read as entertainment. It might look too real, too fast, too dangerous. The director explained that film fighting needed space, clarity, exaggeration, moments the camera could follow. Bruce listened without interrupting, breathing steady, eyes calm, absorbing every word. When the director finished, he added one sentence that would change the entire tone of the conversation. "I need you to make it look less real." Bruce nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. But something in his expression shifted. Not offense, not ego, but recognition. This wasn't a technical request. It was a fundamental misunderstanding between cinema and combat, between illusion and mastery. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. There are many more Bruce Lee stories and lessons still waiting to be discovered. Bruce stepped away from the center of the set and sat on a wooden crate near the edge of the location, wiping sweat from his forearms with a towel while the crew reset equipment. He wasn't upset, but he was thinking deeply. This was not the first time someone had asked him to slow down, soften his movements, or exaggerate for the sake of clarity. It had followed him since the Green Hornet, since television cameras first struggled to keep up with the way he actually moved. What frustrated him wasn't the request itself, it was the implication behind it. That real speed, real efficiency, real danger were somehow mistakes instead of foundations. The director joined him a few minutes later, lowering his voice so the rest of the crew couldn't hear. He explained the problem more clearly now. The audience needed to see the strikes. They needed time to process what was happening. If Bruce moved the way he truly could, the camera wouldn't translate it. The editor wouldn't be able to cut it cleanly. What looked devastating in real time risked looking confusing on screen. Bruce listened carefully, nodding, understanding the filmmaking logic completely. He wasn't ignorant of cinema. He respected it. But cinema, in his mind, was supposed to serve truth, not erase it. Bruce stood and asked a simple question. Do you want it to look real, or do you want it to be readable? The director hesitated. He admitted that readability mattered more. The studio executives were nervous. Insurance was nervous. If a punch landed by accident, production could shut down instantly. Bruce agreed with the concern, but he also knew something the director didn't yet understand. What made his movement look dangerous wasn't aggression. It was precision. He wasn't losing control. He was operating within it. To make his point, Bruce asked for 5 minutes. No cameras, no rehearsal, just a small demonstration. Reluctantly, the director agreed, assuming Bruce would simply show a slowed-down version of the choreography. Instead, Bruce called over 2 stuntmen who had been assigned to the scene. Both experienced fighters, both confident in controlled screen combat. He asked them to attack him lightly, just enough to show intention. Nothing theatrical, no exaggerated wind-ups, just honest movement. What happened next made the director uneasy in a way he hadn't expected. Bruce didn't speed up, he didn't strike harder. He removed hesitation. Each attack was intercepted before it fully existed, distance collapsing instantly, counters stopping so close to contact that the air itself seemed displaced. The stuntmen froze mid-motion, instinctively backing away, suddenly unsure of their timing. It didn't look chaotic, it looked surgical, clean, and unmistakably real. Bruce stopped and stepped back, breathing calmly. Then he said something that reframed the entire conversation. "If I slow down to make it readable, I can do that. But understand, what you're asking me to do isn't acting, it's restraint." The director didn't respond right away. He was watching the stuntmen reset themselves, still shaken, realizing they had just reacted to something their training hadn't prepared them for. In that moment, it became clear that Bruce wasn't struggling to look cinematic. Cinema was struggling to contain him. The director walked back toward the monitor and replayed the last film take again, this time watching with a different eye. What he had initially perceived as a problem of speed now revealed itself as a problem of translation. Bruce wasn't breaking the rules of film language. He was operating beyond them. Traditional fight choreography depended on anticipation, a shoulder turning, a hip loading, a visible setup that gave the camera time to follow the action. Bruce's movement erased those signals. There was no warning, no telegraphing, no exaggerated preparation. Motion began where impact was supposed to end. Bruce returned to his mark without being asked. He didn't press his point, he simply waited. The director finally spoke, not as an authority correcting an actor, but as a craftsman confronting a limitation in his tools. He admitted that what Bruce was doing was technically perfect. Too perfect. If filmed honestly, audiences might not believe it. They would assume trick photography, speed manipulation, editing shortcuts. The irony wasn't lost on Bruce. For years, he had fought to be taken seriously as a martial artist. Now, the authenticity of his skill was at risk of being dismissed as illusion. Bruce suggested a compromise. He would slow just enough for the camera, but only by extending transitions, not by weakening structure. Strikes would still be real in intent, controlled in distance, but framed to allow the audience's eye to keep up. He wasn't willing to fake reactions, to throw wide punches, or to exaggerate pain. If the scene was going to communicate violence, it had to come from precision, not chaos. The director agreed, realizing that forcing Bruce into conventional choreography would strip the film of the very thing that made it different. As they resumed filming, something subtle changed on set. The crew adjusted their behavior. Camera operators leaned in closer, focusing harder. Stuntmen listened more carefully during walkthroughs. No one joked during rehearsals anymore. Bruce's movement demanded attention. Even slowed, it carried weight. Every strike stopped close enough to feel threatening. Every block redirected force rather than colliding with it. The illusion wasn't in the movement. It was in how little he needed to sell danger. Between takes, one of the stunt coordinators quietly admitted something to the director. He said that if Bruce moved any faster, none of them would be able to react safely. The choreography wasn't being slowed for the audience anymore. It was being slowed so everyone else could survive it. The director understood then that he hadn't asked Bruce to make it look less real. He had asked him to protect everyone else from how real it actually was. By the 4th hour of shooting, The compromise had settled into a strange rhythm. Bruce moved at a fraction of what he was capable of, yet even restrained, the set felt charged. The director began adjusting the camera not to exaggerate Bruce's movements, but to contain them. Wider angles, slightly longer takes, fewer cuts. Instead of manufacturing speed in the edit, he allowed Bruce's presence to generate it organically. The result was something no one on set had experienced before, a fight scene that felt dangerous without looking chaotic, intense without relying on tricks. During a longer break, the director finally spoke openly. He admitted that when he had first asked Bruce to make it look less real, what he truly meant was make it safer for the audience to understand. He explained that film language had limits, and Bruce had stepped right up against them. Bruce responded calmly, almost gently. He said that real combat didn't announce itself, didn't pause for clarity, didn't care if it was understood. Cinema, he agreed, had different responsibilities. But it shouldn't lie. It should translate, not replace reality. That conversation changed how the rest of The Big Boss was shot. Bruce was no longer treated like an actor performing choreography. He became a reference point. When something looked off, the question was no longer, is this exciting enough? But, does this feel honest? Fight scenes were built around his timing instead of forcing him into preset rhythms. The camera learned to follow him, not the other way around. Crew members later said this was the moment they realized why Bruce was different, not because he was fast, not because he was strong, but because he understood the difference between performance and truth, and refused to sacrifice one for the other. He wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to communicate something real through a medium that wasn't designed for it. By the end of the day, the director didn't ask Bruce to slow down again. Instead, he asked a different question. What do you think the audience needs to see? Bruce smiled slightly at that. For the first time on that set, his vision wasn't being adjusted. It was being trusted. The final scenes filmed that week carried a weight no one could quite articulate, but everyone felt. Bruce moved with measured restraint, yet every frame still pulsed with intention. The audience would never see his full speed, never witness the true edge of what he could do, but they would feel it. The danger wasn't shown directly, it was implied, hovering just beneath the surface of every exchange. That was the balance Bruce had fought for. Truth without chaos, reality without injury, meaning without exaggeration. After filming wrapped that evening, the director stayed behind longer than usual, watching raw footage alone in the dim light of the makeshift viewing area. What he saw wasn't just a successful action sequence, it was a new grammar for martial arts cinema. No theatrical wind-ups, no dramatic pauses, no false reactions, just efficiency, control, and inevitability. He understood then that asking Bruce to make it look less real hadn't diminished the film, it had revealed its ceiling. Cinema could only go so far. Bruce Lee was already beyond it. In the days that followed, word spread quietly through the production. Bruce wasn't dangerous because he lost control. He was dangerous because he never did. That understanding reshaped how everyone interacted with him. Stuntmen approached with humility. Camera operators anticipated rather than directed. Even producers, watching from a distance, sensed that something irreversible had happened. They weren't just filming a movie anymore. They were documenting the emergence of a new standard. When The Big Boss premiered later that year, audiences felt something different, even if they couldn't name it. The fights didn't look like anything they'd seen before. Critics debated whether the speed was real, whether the movements were enhanced, whether the danger was exaggerated. What none of them realized was that the opposite was true. What they were seeing had been held back, softened, made readable. The real thing had happened months earlier, under the Thai sun, when a director asked Bruce Lee to make it look less real, and learned that reality, when mastered, doesn't need to announce itself. Bruce never corrected the misunderstandings. He never explained what had been removed, what had been restrained, what the camera couldn't keep up with. He didn't need to. The work spoke for him. And from that moment on, martial arts films would chase something they could never quite reach, the quiet, controlled reality Bruce Lee carried into every frame.